A few years ago, had a crazy incident. I had an aneurysm, and when they discovered it, the second thing they asked was whether or not you smoke, and they're like, you have to quit immediately, no carcinogenics, you could die like that. And at that point, you know, never been easier to quit anything if they're like, takes the fun out of it, you know? During that time in my life, I had a friend who was a grower for that Cannacraft and Absolute, who went to the company and was like, hey, my friend's all fucked up, he had to quit smoking. So they started providing me with all kinds of oils and edibles and things that at that point were a fucking gift because, you know, my life had changed dramatically. I'd had to quit smoking. And so the support from them was really heartfelt and I really appreciated it. So a few years into that relationship, when they said, hey, would you like to, you know, do some kind of collaboration with the brand, a lot of the people I work with were like, definitely don't do that. Don't put your name on drugs, you know, like you're not Snoop Dogg. It's not a good idea. But I had so much loyalty to them. Like they'd been so fucking good to me. And I also had a really good idea. The packaging, the branding, the name of it, a strain that I was really into that some friends of mine were providing at the time. And it was called the Fish Tank and it was made from Tangy. At the time that it was released, it was one of the strongest on the market. I went out of my way to kind of like decorate it really nice and make it seem a little bit fancier than what was on the market at the time, which was really important to me. Because I had been relegated to just vaporizing, I was sad. And I missed having fuck tons of flower in my life. So this was a way for me to feel fancy still and enjoy oils and vaporization in a way that like felt exquisite. But I am actually working with Absolute Extract on a second round, Fish Tank 2. That's gonna be pretty exciting. We're also working on a beverage pairing that comes with it. I really love consuming edibles through beverages. I don't know, hits my system great. So we're working on a special kind of like a mocktail in a can that would come with this next round of the Fish Tank. I've always kind of had my ear to this industry the entire 25 years and lived in California. So for me to have my own branded cartridge and my own branded beverage, to attach my artwork to that and have them think of me or my work while they're enjoying it, enjoying that high, it's the best. At 19 years old, I was far more interested in skateboarding than I was in art school, and so that's what I spent the majority of my time doing here. Within the first few weeks I was in the city, I met a guy skating that was working for Dennis. We were smoking at Fort Miley, which is a pretty famous skate spot here in the city, and he was like, hey, you know, how do you feel about medicinal cannabis in California? And I was like, oh, I'm all for it. I grew up with chronic migraines. From the time I was a teenager on, I found that if I smoked weed, it got rid of them immediately. I also like being really stoned and drawing pictures, but as far as it going into a medicinal card situation in California, that was attractive to me. And it paid 50 cents a signature. Every person you could coax to feeling the same way about it that I did was 50 cents in the pocket of an art student in what was slowly becoming a more and more expensive city to live in. Part of the thing that attracted me to San Francisco, obviously art school and skateboarding, but the attitude about marijuana. And so to meet these guys, coincidentally, that bring me into this big place where this dude who's lived in San Francisco forever is trying to push this initiative that I completely agree with, and they're gonna pay me 50 cents a signature. People really need to look to a guy like Dennis Perone. And remember, this didn't just happen accidentally. This was a long rolling snowball that is now affecting America and the world in a big way. Never forget that the second largest growing industry right next to tech in the Bay Area and Northern California specifically was marijuana. And that shit equally changed the fucking world forever at the same times that, you know, Apple and Facebook and all these apps and all this shit came out of here. So did some of the greatest weed in the world, and the rules and the laws that got bent to change the way we'll all enjoy it for the rest of our days. So let's all celebrate San Francisco and Northern California's contribution to what will eventually be, you know, a nationwide change that I'm super proud of. I got out of school, and through one of those relationships, a friend of mine offered me a really rad job in the skateboard industry in what I had studied. I had done a lot of screen printing in high school, knew that was something I was good at. So I spent the majority of my time going to school down the street focusing on screen printing. That is the primary medium to print t-shirts and skateboards in the mid-90s in the skateboard industry. And my friend Dustin Wengreen just happened to offer me a job at a time where, like, you know, I'd been out of school like a month, and his boss had quit, and he took over this gigantic print facility that printed for the entire skateboard industry in Northern California. It was like dream job. It was like more than I could have wished for. I really at that age wanted to do board graphics, but I didn't have the skill set. I had a funky style that didn't really fit skateboarding at that time, and I really just technically wasn't good enough. So this became like grad school. I went into this print shop, which I was qualified to do and really loved and cared about the stuff we were printing, because obviously it was the type of shit I grew up on. that kind of shaped my art to look the way it did. And here I was like behind the scenes manufacturing that stuff for young me. And it was a wonderful opportunity both to like do something I cared about and, more importantly than any of it, study the really amazing artists that were contributing to it. And that's kind of when my style shifted to look more like it does today. Definitely wasn't taking anything away from those guys. I was just learning from how they did it. And all of them I'm really close with now. We joke frequently that my style is kind of a melting pot of all the guys that were contributing to that print shop at that time. And that was the last full-time, well, I went from there to working in an art department at one of those skateboard brands that contributed to the shop. Worked for that entire industry for just about a decade and was the last full-time job I had. Like I said, I quit working for those dudes, had a couple of freelance jobs, had a bunch of art shows. While working for the skateboard industry, I'd had a feature in a magazine called Slap, which was a pretty cool like 90s skateboard magazine that I loved. And in having my artwork in there regularly, I started to get contacted by galleries and art events and things around the world that wanted something with skateboarding in it. That's kind of how my following for my art started to grow. I worked in Hunters Point. I lived out in the avenues. I was working in skateboarding and just didn't really make it to North Beach. So when I started spending time over here again, like after I was a student and after I've invested some time in the city, I really started to soak in the how much fucking crazy history there was around here. Shortly after that, I got an apartment and moved to this neighborhood, and then it was really on. Started to meet my neighbors. My friend Jimmy Shine lives down the street, who worked in the music industry for years and opened a vintage book and map store. And instead of having to do tons of research, this guy is a fucking endless encyclopedia of San Francisco history. And so through him, I got more and more and more invested. So in 2008, I did this whole show that was about like Barbary Coast history, like dawn of the city, gold rush, crazy bars that had a bear tied up in it, and crazy brothels that were saved by the firemen because they loved it, and like just this ill history of the city's trajectory from the earthquake and fire through the gold rush, and just this, Wild West story that this city is. That show in 2008, because I made it all about the city's history, it did really well, it sold really well, but sort of more importantly, people in the city started to give a fuck about my stuff because I was giving a fuck. I do lots of civic projects and lots of stuff for my neighborhood and the city at large and things that have San Francisco in it, but that really all started in 2008. It's not that I didn't draw it before that. That's when it became very historic based and very civic pride based, drawing things to make my fellow citizen stoked. And not stoked on me, stoked on the city. And at the same time, paired with I was getting a lot of chances to show anywhere else. Internationally, a fuck ton. So I was being able to reflect on what was going on in my city compared to all these fucking great cities around the world that I was being invited to go do my job. And when I'm going to those places, I'm wearing San Francisco on my back. Not a lot of guys coming from here at that time to go there and do this job. So I felt responsible not only while I was here to give a fuck about it, but when I'm getting mailed around the world on somebody else's dime to show my artwork, I want them to think about the city I came from at the same time. And again, it all kind of wrapped back into that, like learning about the city's history and seeing where it kind of sent me. The Arts Commission picked me because they knew that my work had a broad appeal. That because of the amount of t-shirts I put my artwork on and signage around the city, advertising and commercial work, like I had a very recognizable style and something that people is narrative. It tells a story very quickly. And so I felt really honored that the Arts Commission considered me for the job. As a matter of fact, I went in to interview for a smaller project through the city that I didn't get, and my feelings were kind of hurt because they invited me. And when they contacted me, they're like, hey, there's a reason you didn't get that one because we have this greater idea where we want you to do 100 drawings about City Hall in 100 days. Fucking cool, but that's hard. And I'm not gonna sit in North Beach and draw 100 drawings about a building across town. You gotta get me an office and you gotta get somebody to publish it. Because nobody goes to an art show and remembers 100 things either. So they agreed. They got me a book deal with Chronicle Books, which is a great local publisher, and an office at City Hall. There was a giant storage room full of architectural drawings and retrofit plans and cool stuff about the building. It was the perfect thing to sit around. They gave me kiosks around the city, those big light up tower things that are on our main boulevards. And the drawings were huge. And I tried to pick ones that had City Hall in it, big as fuck, and just something weird that you had no choice to look at. And I'm not saying oh, my shit is hard not to look at, but there gotta be 1% of people that moved here between 2010 and 2015 for a tech job that normally doesn't give a shit about the city, that saw those and was like, fuck, I don't know what that is, I gotta go look at it, thing's too weird. Or my roommate has a t-shirt with that shit on it. I wonder why he drew City Hall. I'm gonna have to go look at that. The Barbary Coast, Mo Greens, and Grasslands are all sort of a conglomerate of some of San Francisco's most successful and, from a consumer standpoint, without knowing those dudes, fantastic experiences for the customer. They're about to open one down the street in my neighborhood of the last quarter century, and that's a big deal to me. As a heavy smoker and also someone that contributes pretty extensively to the aesthetics of this neighborhood, I couldn't possibly have a dispensary open in this neighborhood without being involved. You know, I'd feel fucked up about it. As it started, the murmurs of them doing it, mutual friend connected us, and I'm definitely working directly with those guys. It's a cool two-part dispensary where the right side is the store, the left side's gonna be an art gallery, and they're gonna have me help them curate it and find cannabis-related work that can be displayed in there. This neighborhood traditionally had a shitload of visual art and artists. There were a ton of galleries back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when it was obviously much more affordable around here. Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, for example, just lived a few blocks from here. The Art Institutes had a huge roster of amazing artists, filmmakers, photographers that went there, and this area was a really prime spot for them to showcase. Not so much anymore. And the fact that they're not only opening here, which has been super hard, most importantly, the fact that they're gonna have an art gallery that's gonna allow the sort of vibe of this area to come back a little bit. And it's guys like these Barbary Coast dudes that have the finance to change that. It'll bring a lot of necessary foot traffic to this area. People who are going in and buying that sort of thing tend to be the kind of folks where they've got a little bit extra money to go and have a drink or a sandwich, a coffee, and support the wonderful things that are in this area that surround this new dispensary. It's also on a street that's full of bars. It's not unheard of for people to come to North Beach and get out of hand. I love the fact that a different sort of consumption is going to exist here, and you can come to North Beach and get stoned and look at some cool art. That's something this neighborhood needs to have officially, and I'm really proud to be involved in that experience. This dispensary is going to change my neighborhood, and that's really important to me.